You prefer your wife to any other women. It's not because you hate other women. It's just that's how we operate. The same with your kids. You love your kids more than you love any other kids because it's all about our preferences. And people who claim that they like everyone, in some sense, they contradict the word like itself, because like is in some sense our preferential preference in the hierarchy of our values. We like something that we value the most than many other things. It's very important to understand our preferences, because to claim that everything is equal, it means everything is flat and there's no preferences in the world. It kind of goes against your own self. That's what's happening now in the world, because the West somehow tried to convince itself to its own detriment that all cultures are equal and all religions are equal. And it's not true, because if it was true, then every country would have equal prosperity with an equal religious idea underneath. But it's not. You can check this basic on facts by looking on the life in other countries. The West is the most prosperous civilization on earth currently right now, because of the way how we treat our own population, because of our scientific achievements, and because of our theology that lies underneath our culture, and because our culture as well incredibly powerful in its tolerance to its own detriment. But the problem with us, we became so comfortable with ourselves that we're ready to accept people who don't want to accept us. For example, let's take this idea that if you hire somebody based on this person's skin color, can you fire this person because this person is incompetent? Because in the first place, you hire this person based on his or her skin color, or based on his or her gender. That's the problem. Meritocracy was created in America as a solid structure for success for a reason, because when you hire people based on their meritocracy, your company become much more prosperous. And if your country appreciate meritocracy, your country become much more prosperous, because you value a real thing in people, their meritocracy. But if you force to hire people based on their skin color, based on their gender, based on their sexual preference, it means that you cannot fire them based on their incompetency or bad work ethic, because you never hire them on these qualities in the first place. Why I'm talking about this? Because a lot of people think that somehow to be incredibly tolerant is a good thing. Tolerance is supposed to be to a certain degree. It's good to a certain degree, because you can be tolerant to your neighbors, but you still have to have a door, and you still have to have a gun in your house, and you still have to able to protect yourself and your family. If your house doesn't have a door, it's not your house anymore, because you now rely on the mercy of a stranger who can walk into your house anytime. Only strength can respect other strength. Only force can respond on other force. We can be tolerant to a certain degree, but there's supposed to be certain limit in your tolerance, because if you have unlimited tolerance, you will be taken advantage of. Like now it happened in Britain, where there was Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs that responsible for raping many thousands of young white British girls. And the biggest problem is with the authorities, who refuse to investigate these atrocious cases. and who refuse to do anything just out of fear to be called racist and Islamophobes. Words has consequences, and when we play with semantics, we actually cause real problem to real people, the most vulnerable people in our society, like in this case, white young British girls. And it's breaking my heart to read even this report, this inquiry, because it's so unfair, it's so horrible, it's so devastating. It's it seems like you can expect this from any other countries, but not from Britain. Because Britain's supposed to be incredibly great place to live, incredibly safe place to live, but it's not the case any longer. My point is, when you grant certain privileges to certain minority groups, be those minority based on their ethnicities or on religious ideas, you have to be very careful, because you can't just blindly grant them these privileges like Islamophobia and racism. You can't give them this, because the worst elements from these minority groups might use those words to defend their crimes, to justify crimes against the majority. And you see what happened. The police, the authority who's supposed to protect their own people, refuse to protect them because of the words like racism and Islamophobia. It does make no sense, but that's thing that happened, and it's happening for many, many, many years. And cover-up was incredibly horrific. And I don't know, what would you feel? Because think about it, you live in a house, right, with your parents, you're a small child, and suddenly a stranger came to your house, and the stranger began abusing you, horribly abusing you. And you look at your parents for help, and your parents tell you to shut up, don't be racist, don't be Islamophobe. And you have to take this abuse again and again and again and again until the stranger is satisfied and he or she leaves this house. That's what exactly happened in Britain, because the government's supposed to protect their own citizens first, but they let foreigners in who refuse to assimilate to the great British culture. And these foreigners commit crimes. Not all foreigners, not all, but they're committed crimes in a high proportion. And people who try to speak up about it would were called racist, were called Islamophobe. It seems like it really doesn't make no sense. It's not tolerance. It's some sort of, I don't know, some perverted masochism. Because what kind of tolerance is that? You have to have such a limitation in your own tolerance. Because if you don't have limitation in your own tolerance, it will work against you. People can be good and can be bad. It depends on the culture. Culture, in some sense, help people to restrain their biological activities, like this desire for dominance. Because we have this in our limbic system, this sex drive to dominate other people, drive to power. We want this stuff. And that's why that's what we have theology, religion, who help us to maintain common values, because the West itself was predominantly built on Christian values. We have certain values in us. I came from Russia, and when I moved to America, I haven't seen much difference between Russians and Americans, because we kind of have the same. I'm Orthodox Christians, and it's kind of similar to American Christianity because we are Christians, so we have the same kind of values. My point is, we have to be very careful. And I'm not saying that you have to completely restrict immigration from certain countries. No, but you have to let it slowly come to your country. They have to assimilate. They have to become part. They have to find their identity inside of the British countries. What happened in Britain is horrible. And when you read this report, and I read a little bit, it's horrific. It's horrific, and it's crimes. And I don't know how people can even defend this, or how people can just close their eyes and not to talk about it. It's bad. It's horrible. But the most horrible thing is this cover-up over fear of being called racism and Islamophobe. Think how much power these minority groups have over British authorities that works against British population. Just think for a second about it. That's why I'm against words like this. I'm against to give them power, because in most cases, criminals is going to use the words to protect their crimes, to justify their brutal ideas of life against peaceful citizens of those countries. I'm against those words because I came from the Soviet Union, where you can go to prison for words. And it's like a lot of people say you have freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean you don't have to take consequences. There are consequences and there are consequences. I mean, if some idiot call you racist just for saying normal, logical, reasonable thing, this person is just idiot. You don't have to mind this person. But when the government terrified to be called racist and Islamophobe just because certain group of people predominantly committed crimes against their own citizen, against their own young girls, white young British girls, it doesn't make no sense. I'm sorry, you cannot justify that. You can, because you have to read report to understand the atrocities of what happened. And we have to generalize, because we have to create categories. We cannot create data without creating categories of certain groups of people to see how much crime committed in certain groups of people, because we have to understand to be able to protect ourselves. Because if we're going to refuse, and if we're going to start talking about individualism is good when you push through your identity and become something within yourself, but majority of us, we just part of the category. We're part of the generalization. It's not a bad thing. It's not discrimination. It's not this. It's just to create data. For example, if Pakistani Muslim men commit disproportionate crime in Britain, we have to understand why. We have to ask these communities why it's happening. Why? Because of the culture or because of your religion? Why these crimes committed against the white British girl? You have to ask this question, because if you don't ask these uncomfortable questions, there's no way to resolve the issue, because it will continue again and again. You cannot judge them as individuals, because it was kind of like cultural, almost identity in some sense. I'm not saying all of them, but disproportionate amount of these people done this. It makes no sense, and everybody terrified to ask questions. Even authority themselves wanted to cover this up. Of course, we have to be careful, but we cannot tolerate crime against people, especially by those who come to the West with the hate in their heart and try to destroy it from the within. We have to learn to protect it. Otherwise, it's going to be worse. And we have to learn how to talk about it, because once you learn how to talk about it, we can reduce the pressure from people. Because people, if you think people, if people don't talk about it, they don't feel it, you're wrong. Because if people don't talk about it, it doesn't mean they don't know about it. Because eventually the pressure valve will snap and it can come even worse. And we have to learn how to talk about it, even in a wrong way. But I think you can talk about it from a reasonable position, have this reasonable point of view, because there are some cultural differences. There are some religion differences among people, and not all cultures are equal. Not all religions are equal, and we have to learn to talk about it. We have to learn to generalize people. We have to learn to create data and to apply this data without being called racist, because the facts don't care about your feelings, and there's facts that show that there's some discrepancy in the crime among British population, and especially the crime among foreigners who come from certain cultures. We have to talk about it because we want to solve this problem. The same in America, the same thing. We have to learn to talk about it, because I noticed this one thing when people from Somalia, the Somalian fraud, for example, right? I noticed the main defense from a lot of people were just racist. You're racist and you're Islamophobe. The same defense. It makes no sense. If people, for example, from Somalia come to America and disproportionately commit fraud, it's not because of these people, because there's something missing in their culture, something missing in that we have to understand what to be able to resolve the issue. But if they call you racist and Islamophobe for just doing inquiry into this issue, it makes no sense. You just have to ignore it, because it really doesn't matter. It's so strange because racist and Islamophobe make no sense anymore. It's really literally make no sense. They're just two words just thrown upon white people from the West to just insult them, to intimidate them into compliance. That's it. There's literally, this word stop making complete sense. That's it. If somebody call you racist, it's probably because you say something reasonable. If somebody call you Islamophobe, probably because you said something reasonable. That's what happened in most cases. It's just some sort of the self-defense of people who just want to get offended for any reasons. Or people who commit crimes and want to get away with these crimes. And if you point on this, they would call you Islamophobe or racist. And that's, I think, the biggest issue. And if you're in the forest and you see a fence in the forest, don't take this fence down before you learn why this fence is over there. Because there are certain things, or in some places, that you have to be careful. Like we, for some reason, decided to cancel our certain biological traits of tribalism, for example. We, for some reason, stopped believing that people aren't tribal. All cultures are equal. Religion doesn't matter. But again and again, we see difference. We see that it's not true, and we try to cover up against our own common sense by sacrificing the most vulnerable peoples in our world, in our society, in our countries. Multiculturalism doesn't work because it's not a thing in itself. There's only one culture supposed to be in the country, dominant culture. There's, of course, several subcultures, but this dominant culture must be in charge. That's how any country functions. That's just common sense, because if you demonize the main culture of the country, then this country would fragment it on many other small cultures, on small tribes, and these tribes start warring with each other like it was before many, many times through history. When I came to America with acceptance in my heart that American culture is much more superior to Russian culture. I accept this. That's why I speak English. That's why I learn English language. That's why I comply with American laws. I'm still Russian, but I'm a Russian American. I pledge allegiance to this country. And it's something. It's worth something. My point is that you have to accept. If you decided to move to another country, you have to accept that this country is superior to your old country. This country is better than your old country. This country's culture is much, 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 much more better than your old culture. Once you accept this, you will change. And that's how you can assimilate in a new culture and make a home out of a new place. That's my exact point. But if you scream constantly racism, Islamophobia, maybe these countries aren't for you. Maybe you shouldn't come here in the first place.